Okay. So welcome. Today, Lauren, Christina, and I are going to be talking about Sun transits 25 and 17. So we're going to explore around, see what we can find, and see what we can learn, and what we can play with over the next two periods of 5.5 days. So, Christine, would you like to start off by cluing us in on what's happening with these gates?
Sure, I'll start, but I don't know that I can clue anybody in, but I'll start with what I know, which um so this we're heading into gate 25, which is aligns with the spring equinox, right? And so we are um moving into this new phase entirely. In some ways, it's not a new phase from a human design perspective, but from an astrological perspective, it very much is, right? This is the beginning of this new astrological cycle. And and we are now exiting. We spent a lot of time in this eighth of the wheel that was all about our emotions and fire. Clinging fire was the trigram on the bottom. We're now moving into the eighth of the wheel, where the bottom trigram is thunder. So gate 25 has its bottom trigram as thunder, which again, it's just this energetic space, right? In which we can totally recognize as very spring energy, very new beginning energy. And so the next eight gates will all share that kind of, get up and move sort of energy. Um, and gate 25 is called the spirit of the self, and the hexagram name is innocence. And it really is this beautiful universal love, like childlike innocence that we all have the capacity for, right? And so this next few days, I think it's one of those things to really like pay attention to, again, especially where we are in the moment on the planet, right? This idea of universal love seems very far, very far away. But this is a real opportunity to kind of sit in that space and really be supported in this remembrance that no matter what it looks like outside, we really are all connected, right? We really are the other at the very base of our being. And this universal love is tapping into that, reminding us that we aren't actually separate, right? It sits in our identity center in the body graph, and it is very much about our higher self, right? And this higher self knowing. Um, just just bringing awareness, I think, right now, especially this year, especially where we are, right? Really allowing us to bathe in that for a while and sit with that.
As I was listening to you, Christine, I thought, well, what a perfect time for this game, actually, right? When that isn't apparent at all. And it seems like the energy will show up then to direct our focus there and support our ability to see it, because most of us are walking around going, what is happening, right? And we're not seeing it because we're looking here, right? And it feels to me this gate will give us that opportunity to go, oh, but it is here. It is. I'm just not looking. My eyes aren't where they belong. When I look at the Hilary Barrett's translation of the I Ching, her question was asking, what is real? What's your responsibility? What's not here? And trying to marry that with this idea of universal love, I think it's, what are you seeing? Is this all theatrics that we're seeing, and the universal love is just right through it? Possibly that's what we're going to discover.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it feels like coming out of where we are right now. There's been so much having to drop in and trust ourselves, and in that space where it's a little more isolating. And now, like moving into this where there's this opening, but it feels like we need to really get out of our heads for this one. Like the Like if we stay in our heads around what's happening, that's going to cut us off from what's available to us.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's the sense I've been having with this one.
Yeah, yeah. So this gate where it sits in our body, like I said, it's in our identity center, which is our higher self, and it's the only gate that actually has a direct connection to our heart center as well, our physical heart. And these two centers are very similar in this love space, right? One is this higher self love, and one is this more like love of yourself in the material world, right? And what's of value. And so I really think about this 25 space as being the conduit, the space. It's part of the channel of initiation, right? And it's this place where we can really discern this between this material plane love that we all talk about and think about, and this much broader and more lovely in some ways love that's much beyond, this lifetime, right? This world this day that I'm living, right? And so it is a particularly interesting gate to me from this physiological perspective of like where it just sits in our body and this connecting ability it has to bring our mundane self into this higher self space.
Hmm.
Is it that the head heart connection that like there's this tension in here with I was just thinking the shadow aspect of this one is so counter to the universal love. It's
Mm-hmm.
like this pulling back, pulling in,
Yeah.
and like as you were saying, it's like move more away from the emotional, and yet it's very driven by the emotional,
Yeah.
like that sort of that constriction that happens when we don't feel right or don't like something or something's not going our way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. And again, like all these energies can display in their polarity too, right? Like this universal love can be just rejection of everything, right? It can be a self-rejection, right? It can be, feeling unworthy or, and feeling other people are unworthy of love too, right? So we have those opportunities to really think about, you know, how am I seeing the world, right? And is how I see the world true? Right? And do
Mhm.
I have space?
Mhm.
And that also, we'll talk about this in the next, 17 gate. These two kind of flow together in that way, right? And so this is a great moment to be, like I said, really assessing. Like I was trying to think of like what would be the contemplations, that might be aligned for this gate. And then, like where are you withholding love, right? Is that external? Is it internal? Where are those places in us? Um, and how could extending love empower you, right? Because this is an individual energy. This is the energy to see through the illusion that we're separate, right? And to empower us to remember that we are actually all one, right? And if I can't love myself, I can't love another, and vice versa.
Mhm. I think when our goal is to see through, we have to disentangle with a lot. And that was a word that kept coming up for me when I was reading about Hexagram 25. And also, as I'm listening to you, you're not saying that, but that really is. You almost, even looking from the shadow side of constriction, right? We have to disentangle with that and say, I'm going to move beyond that. And so as I was thinking about that, what would that translate to in Gemmo world? And I actually thought about Blackthorn, and just bear with me here for a minute on that, because Blackthorn is this really scraggly old time fairy tale like shrub that produces this thicket, right? And these gigantic thorns. It was often planted around moats to protect castles. And so it offers this bit of protection, but and I believe that's what we need, this protection, so that we can disentangle with what's not real, what our head is telling us, what our beliefs and thoughts that no longer serve us tell us. And this also corresponds very well with the astrology of this time of, rethinking our beliefs and revisiting and letting them go, just drop them. And my feeling is this is going to be a really powerful 5.5 days, not squeezing us. It could if we resist, right? But opening us up to new possibilities.
And in that opening us up to new possibilities, one of the things that occurred to me is just that taking a moment. But in this taking a moment, something that a yoga instructor said years ago popped up for me is that the breath is the barometer of the emotions. So the moment the breath is constricting and isn't relaxed, something's not quite, you're not in alignment.
Yeah.
So that there's an opportunity to say, oh, what is that?
Yeah.
What's off here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a very simple thing. It's with us all the time. So
Yeah.
So,
And
but
that's not
remember to use it.
that self-dialogue is so important. It was a game changer for me when I could start tapping into these somatic indications that my nervous system was dysregulated. And whether it's breath or heart rate, but breath is so obvious to many. And just going, hey, honey,
yeah.
sounded a little off here. What is it? Right?
Yeah.
What's causing that?
Yeah. And then that just in that moment of maybe discomfort, it's just to sit with it and say, what's it telling me?
Exactly.
It's
That's
information. Yeah.
Well, and that's the path, that's the way through the gene key, right? Constriction to acceptance, right? And this acceptance of what is, right? It seems really tricky for people right now. And, it's just like, yeah, I get it. It looks hard out there, things feel hard, but resisting it is, a whole other use of your energy that may not actually serve you very well. So this acceptance piece, really, like if you can't get to universal love this next 5 days, try acceptance.
I think that's the short train. So
Yeah,
that's a good one.
right? Just try that. See how that feels for a few days.
But it's interesting with acceptance is even if we're angry with someone, if we just sort of open the heart and be more accepting, something shifts.
Yes.
I mean, what you're angry about might still be there, but there's more room.
Yeah.
And listening to both of you speak of this opening up, I mean, nature is doing that right now, right? And where this gate comes right at equinox at the beginning of spring. And even though in some places it may not look like spring yet, but something is opening. And if we can take our cues there, and if a crocus can come up through a snowbank, perhaps you too could move into a place of acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I take acceptance. It leads us quite nicely into 17 in
Yeah.
that tendency to look for flaws in things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. 17 in human design is the gate of opinions. And we can definitely see those in the world. And the hexagram is called following, right? And so it again, like this is it's funny, it's a following energy here too, right? Like we've been in this identity space in our middle of our being, and then in gate 17 we move up to our ajna, right? Up to our mind, the thinking part of our mind, the mind that is making sense of all the inspiration and questions and ideas. And so it's formulating thoughts and opinions, right? And then it wants to make sense of the world. And this is a logic gate, right? It very much wants to take in experiences, see the patterns, put things in order, right? To the point where this gate is sometimes referred to as the gate of naming, right? Like we literally, this is where we're like, I'm going to call this and call this, right? Like it is very orderly in that way. And so we come out of this very kind of soft, loving, universal love energy, right? And drop right into, okay, now what are we going to do with that? Right? So, yeah.
And not only what are we going to do with it, but can we move through it with a flow? And can we find that balance between driving ourselves or moving with the energy that's present? And I think this is going to be such a beautiful week to gain that clarity, to stay between the 2 points, between that, okay, I've got it, it's clear, right? And forcing something to happen rather than working with the flow that's there.
Yeah. Yeah, and opinions are really like they're tricky, right? We know, like we can think we know how something goes and we can be kind of flexible about it, be like, that's what I think, but who knows? And then we can be like, no, this is the only way to do this. Right? And that's the place that we don't want to get to, right? And I think that's the place that this gate 25 beforehand can kind of help remind us, like, there's not a lot of pleasure in that really dogmatic space, right? There's not a lot of love there, not internal or external. The dilemma of, from a Gene Keys perspective, the dilemma of 17 is actually called politics. And, Richard's not talking about like what we think of as the outside politics per se. What he's saying is that that all happens because of our internal politics, right? Because we ourselves are often fighting within ourselves, holding on to things that we think are true, right? Not being flexible, right? And then that expresses out in the world in this political way. So paying attention to that over the transit could be helpful.
Well, and he also talks about how the logic is like where it's that basis of us trying to sort things out, that then becomes a problem in and of itself, because logic out logics itself in a way, which made me think of Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance,
Yeah.
reading that years ago, and how, I mean, he virtually went crazy
Yeah.
within his logic.
Yeah.
It's, so, but like when people are really moved by this looking for flaws, and then with the hexagram, it really speaks to this too, doesn't it? With the if I'm always out there looking for what's wrong, that's what I'm going to find.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in what you're saying about the naming, is like if I've put everything in a box and it needs to stay in its box,
Yeah.
and it's either right or wrong, that's a really uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is opposite of the hexagram, right? It's the joyous over thunder, right? It's there for joy, right? These opinions, this understanding of the world, this way to make sense of things, right, is there to bring more joy, not more dissatisfaction and displeasure, which is where we often take it.
Yeah. There's a theme in the hexagram about bringing that childlike sense there, and to be able to, and because a child can begin playing with something and see all the possibilities, right? It could be this way or this way. I mean, right? Just try to get them to follow instructions. It's right. And for us to adopt some of that and seeing them from various ways. And I think that the gate really, the energy here is going to push our head. And because of that, I've thought of an extract that would drop us out of that into the body, and that's hazel. And this is an interesting path that got me here, but hazel works with increasing elasticity in the lungs and in the liver, in our ability to be flexible beyond where we normally would in places that we can hold rigid. And it's interesting if you look from the Asian medicine lens, we process a lot of emotions through our liver and our lungs. And to let go of them, we need to surrender. And that's really the essence of Hazel. So I think it might be an interesting one to help bring you, particularly if you're feeling really fixed and you feel that critic showing up early in your week, to test that out. I think maybe taking a drop or two before bed might help ease your way into the next day.
Yeah, I've done that a lot with Hazel. I don't know if it's made me less inflexible, but I sleep better.
Yeah, I think too with the critic is like watching all these comparisons that we do. And just to say, like, so this is better than that. And, like this is higher or lower, all of the sort of polarities, and realizing that almost everything is both.
Yeah.
So then allowing us to look at the bigger picture rather than getting caught in the details of things, which seems to be with this gate, that's what will hold people back, getting caught in the details, the dogma of what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
So it's to look at, so if I'm thinking this is really good, maybe just to flip it around and say, well, what's the downside of it? Or the other way, this is really bad. What's the upside in this?
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think, Lois, of, one of the core foundational things in human design that Ra talked a lot about as he, grew through the system himself, is he recognized, our language, right? Our language is very limiting in many ways, right? It's very, I mean, we have a beautiful language, it has tons of words, but they seem to mostly carry moral judgment of some sort, right? One way or the other. And so it's very difficult for us, because we're programmed by our language, right? To recognize that the program that we live in, the universe consciousness, doesn't really have a moral judgment, right? And we ascribe things as morally good or bad, or left or right, or up or down, right? And so later on in the teaching, he very specifically would just use the words this and that, right? To try to remind people that there is no good or bad in any of this, right? We all have these experiences. They are this or that, right? The world is this or that. And I found that personally quite helpful, because I hear, you hear these words, and you can train yourself to hear these words when other people speak them or when you speak them yourself, and be like, wait, it's just this or that, right?
I find it's much easier to hear it in someone else than myself. I'll be really honest.
Really? I can totally hear my own moral judgment all the time.
It could be just as valuable to watch that and you notice it in someone else
Yeah.
and say, okay, let me take a look at that. They think that's really bad, you know.
Yeah.
But like, can I take a look at that and see what I think?
Well, you practiced it right there, Lois. You took my criticizing myself and made it this or that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think that 17, that transit, would be a really great time to do some contemplation around that, right? Just bringing your attention to your own polarity types of language. We're all programmed into it. And just try to catch yourself and just think, really, is that true, right? Is that true? You know?
And then the gift here then too in the Gene Keys is farsightedness,
Yeah.
which we really could use right now.
Yeah.
That the ability to see beyond what's going on right now,
Yeah.
and be able to look a little more forward in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that practice is a far-sighted practice, right? It's actually the ability to project yourself and your thoughts a bit into the future and be like, wait, right? Is that really, is it true? Is it serving me? Does it serve them, right? Like, is this going to put me on a path that I wasn't even recognizing, right? Like, so there is some interesting farsightedness in that as well.
And some opportunity.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm. That feels very complete today, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I like how we just get there and we're like, I think we've said it all.
Yeah, it just happens.
Um,
All right. So thank you. And we hope we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Lois. Thanks.